Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Mark Shelly, who owns a private office in Pennsylvania where he has practiced medicine for 20 years, and he will be speaking on the core problem of the American healthcare system. I'd like to introduce Mr. Mark Shelly.
Thanks. As Keisha said, I'm a family physician and practice in a very rural area of Pennsylvania. A family physician is family practice is a specialty. It's a specialty of being a generalist, and our position is to assimilate all the parts of a patient and holistically take care of the heart, lungs, brain, toes, and either keep or make the patient well. And as I've done this for a while, I think I can apply that perspective to looking at the functioning of your healthcare system. There are some serious flaws, and I think all of you understand that our current healthcare system has not been kept well. So what shall we do? If we can't keep it well, we'll make it well, or try. So approaching this as I might, one of the other problems that I would have in my everyday life, I'll make a diagnosis. So we say, well, what's wrong with healthcare? What's wrong with it? I think most of us understand that the quality is low and the price is high. We're paying gourmet prices for vending machine food. We had recently in a 378-page report, which was entitled "Shorter Lives, Poorer Health," was published by the National Academies Press. This found that we spend $9,000 per capita. This was as of 2012. This is 2.5 times the OECD average as a percent of GDP. It's also much higher. We spend 17.6% of our massive GDP on healthcare. This organization of countries, the OECD, includes the U.S., the EU, but also Turkey and Mexico, countries that we may not routinely expect to have better health care than we do, or at least certainly health care at a better value. Because in the United States, there are fewer physicians per 1,000 population at 2.4 than there are in the OECD average at 3.3 per thousand. There are fewer physician visits, 4 compared to 6.4 here as compared to the OECD, and fewer and shorter hospital stays. Markers of wellness in the United States, for example, life expectancy, infant mortality, incidence of diabetes, obesity, these markers have all shown steady deterioration in the last decade. Until today, children born today are projected to have a shorter life expectancy than their parents, reversing a trend of many centuries. So maybe this is the complaint of the patient. This is a description of the problem. So we have to find out why. What happened? What's the diagnosis? And so try to generate data and use logic. Persevere, and I think we can have the diagnosis. I know it's popular to blame your physician. I know that real well. But your physician does not determine how, if, when, or what your care will be. In the year 2000, 57% of the nation's 682,470 physicians had a stake in the practice in which they treated patients. They owned the practice. They had at least a partial ownership. And they were generally their own bosses, to a certain extent at least, and the buck stopped pretty much close to there. Socrates said, privilege flows from responsibility, and that was, we were able to acknowledge that. I think there's a graph on the, so in 1960, 85% of physicians worked for themselves. By 2000, it's 57%. By 2013, 36% of physicians work for themselves. This trend is not about to stop. I believe in 2000, 3% of physicians graduating from residencies listed hospital employment as their primary choice, and that number is almost 40% today. It's the profession is leaving independent practice in droves. So, who do they work for? I mean, they're treating you, the patient. That's their ultimately the physician works for the patient. We hope. But these physicians are employed by hospitals, as we've mentioned, maybe insurance companies and multinationals. And these are one or another company or an organization which must be fed money. They exist for money. This is what they live on, and they need a lot of money. I think we have another slide. Oh. This guy didn't have an 85% overhead, okay? And he probably treated the doll for free, too. This, I don't know if you can read this or not. These are the medical marketplace conglomerates. Some of the folks in Leesburg found these for me. The first is the Universal Health Services. They're in 36 states. They have 218 facilities, and their annual revenue is $7.5 billion. Health South Corporation, again, they're in all 50 states. I believe that's, I'm sorry, I can't read it. 2.0 billion. The next number, roughly 10 billion. Next number, 6 billion. These are the companies. These are the companies for whom your doctor is working. Your doctor doesn't decide. Your doctor has two masters. Your doctor has the Hippocratic Oath, or the intangible, and he has the paycheck writer. He has his boss. This, and as I say, this continues. So this creates a conflict of interest, and we've heard the word conflict many times today, as in Vietnam conflict or Korean conflict. This is a war. The best interest of the patient competes or conflicts with the best interest of the company. This struggle goes on within your physician as he attempts to make you well. That's really, physicians don't go to medical school in order to not make people well. They truly want to do this. Now, the company has many means of coercion to win this conflict, this struggle, and they have the time and your money and a lot of personnel to apply these means. And this situation, this struggle, has manifested to such a degree that it can no longer be ignored, which is obviously their first choice. But it's evolved to a degree, or devolved to a degree, that the American Medical Association, which is arguably the largest and most influential physician organization in the U.S., developed and published in November 2012 what they called Principles to Address Conflicts of Interest. And I know that's completely unable to be read, but there are 5 principles. The number one is listed as a doctor's paramount responsibility is to his or her patients. Additionally, given that an employed physician occupies a position of significant trust, he or she owes a duty of loyalty to his or her employer. This divided loyalty can create conflicts of interest, such as financial incentives to over or undertreat patients, which employed physicians should strive to recognize and address. Well, thank you very much for that. You know, when a person tries to give you a right, it means he really believes you don't have the right to start with. Your doctor believes that his paramount responsibility is to you, but his employer doesn't. The reason the AMA developed these principles is because they've already been violated. The second, and I'll run through these, employed physicians should be free to exercise their personal and professional judgment in voting, speaking, and advocating on any matter regarding patient care interests. The profession, healthcare, and the community should be able to exercise their own judgment in voting, speaking, and advocating on any manner. Employed doctors should not be deemed in breach of their employment agreements nor be retaliated against by their employers for asserting these interests. You're obviously not stating, you're not stating this for no reason. This has been done a lot. Patient welfare must take priority. In any situation where the economic or other interests of the employer are in conflict, patient welfare must take priority in any situation where the economic or other interests of the employer are in conflict with patient welfare. Doctors should always make treatment and referral decisions based on the best interests of their patients. Physicians who hold administrative leadership positions must promote policies to enhance patient care. All these principles have already been violated, and it doesn't feel good as a physician. So we have the principles, and they've been published. So now what happens with them? The problem goes away? No. This is not a law. It has no real effect on the actual functioning of the system, and I suspect the problem will continue to devolve just as it has in the past. The League of Nations after World War I had these righteous but more or less ineffective or useless statements. So you have a war, you have two sides, you have a conflict of interest. What are they? What are these two sides? One is the tangible, the solid, the money, versus the intangible, which is exemplified by the Hippocratic Oath. It's a promise from the profession to the patient. It's the sense of duty. It's an intangible. So I really think that this conflict, this war, is at the basis of a lot of what we all experience with our horribly broken healthcare system. The value is not there. How did it start? I'll try to give you a little history, try to flesh out with some data how exactly I believe this has happened. And I can tell you, in 1973, legislation was passed which allowed the formation of what has been called a Health Maintenance Organization, or an HMO. This was during the term of Richard Nixon. These organizations function generally by accepting a flat fee for generally a year from the patient, and then, or your employer, which is the same thing as from you. So this money is accepted and then paid to providers, hospitals, laboratories, or physicians, and a profit is kept for the company. If the patient stays well and requires no input, then everybody keeps their share of the money, and everything is fine. If the patient is not well, then all the providers, the care providers, must spend the money they were given, and probably much more, because they're using the money from the patients who did not require care. So, but if the patient is not well and is not treated, they still keep the money. You just don't see them. They're just not taken care of. They're just denied care. How do you deny care? There are a lot of ways that you can just pretend that you're trying to do the best, and there are many mechanisms for this. If this was a person, it would be a congenital defect when the HMOs were created. There's an inherent at-heart-based conflict of interest, and this has grown since 1973. That was a while ago. Okay. It's the spirit of medicine, or an intangible, or the spirit of humanity versus money, material. And there's a war going on. I tell my 12-year-old, nobody wins a war. One side just loses less. Okay? When you see the failure of the healthcare system, you see the cost of this war. So there are some more interesting data, which I have to say, we all become isolated and project our values on others. And I really didn't realize how little known some of these concepts were. So your physician, in treating you, he must know. He has a reason for doing what he does. It's what he's learned. It's why he's gone to school. Or like a mechanic who gets the manual for your make of car. It's the best he can do. And this is the result of studies which are done, science. Okay, this is the science that we turn to. These studies are done by generating data, evaluating it, and reaching conclusions. And now, the process of doing this study in the case of a new drug runs as follows. A large number of patients are divided into two groups, maybe 500 people here, 500 here. One group of patients, 500 of these patients are given a medication. The other 500 are given a placebo, which is a sugar pill, or maybe a different medication. Of course, the time goes by, and there are measurable changes between the treated patient and the placebo patient. These measurements are taken and subjected to statistics, and the results of that analysis recommends or rejects the use of this medication. Now, if the medication is used, it becomes profitable, sometimes very, very profitable, often. With these patented medicines, I'm sure you have some sense of the incredible amount of money that's going into the pharmaceutical industry. With pure science, the funding source it doesn't matter, okay? But this testing is very expensive, and is funded by different organizations which may or may not have a financial stake in the outcome. In August 3rd, 2010, Annals of Internal Medicine report analyzed 500 drug trials of the type described above. And the results of each of these trials, determined whether the drug should be used to the profit of its maker or not to be used, and the research and development money would have been lost. 75% of these studies of the 500 were funded by the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and the rest by nonprofit organizations. So our study of the studies is these were funded by people who will benefit from the drug being useful, and these were funded by somebody who's unbiased. Okay. The research funded by the industry was 85% positive, meaning these drugs would go on and be used and sold. That was 6 out of 7 times. The studies funded by the nonprofits were anywhere from 50 to 60% positive, roughly 1 out of 2. When the company will make a profit, will take much of your money for the use of this drug, 6 out of 7 times they're able to say yes. When nobody really profits other than science and the patient, then it's 1 out of 2. I mean, that's unambiguous. Now, 75% of these studies were funded by the pharmaceutical companies, which most of them are, because these companies obviously have a lot of money, and they have a lot of reason to make more. So and there are many other ways that this happens. Now, what else is funded by this profit arm of the conflict? Now, we practice according to loose and general concepts, which are called the standard of care. For example, the standard of care for a heart attack would be to hospitalize the patient and give a course of medications and interventions. Now, these standards change over time as new procedures and drugs become available. For example, in 1980, we had clot-dissolving medications, which became available and became standard, and cardiac catheterization. Standards change. This standard of care would have been determined by the American College of Cardiology. And the standard of care for delivering babies is the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists. So each specialty society generates many clinical practice guidelines. A 2009 review of 14 American College of Cardiology guidelines published in the Journal of AMA by Tricoci found that 11% were based on solid research, while nearly 1/2 were based on expert consensus. These were people sat down and issued an edict. So who are the edict issuers? I mean, were they paid by drug companies? I mean, let's move to the point. Were these people paid by drug companies to issue this edict, this statement that we all more or less have to follow, because they didn't do testing, they just decided? Well, Mendelsohn et al. And others in the Archives of Internal Medicine 2011 reviewed 17 guidelines with 498 contributors and found that 56% had a conflict of interest. Newman and others in the British Medical Journal 2011 reviewed 14 U.S. and Canadian clinical practice guidelines on diabetes and elevated blood cholesterol. 5 of these 14 did not list conflicts of interest, which doesn't mean there was no conflict. They just didn't list it. The 9 which did have documentation, 50% of the authors had conflict of interest. These people are deciding how you will be treated, and they're being paid. A 2002 survey of 100 specialty guidelines revealed that 87% had ties to the pharmaceutical industry. That was Chowdhury and others in the Journal of the AMA 2002. This is my favorite, though. In the British Medical Journal 2002, Lenzer and others described an allegedly nonprofit organization which issued a guideline recommending the use of a drug for stroke. Probably a group of neurology physicians said, okay, this is how we will treat stroke. This is the allegedly nonprofit organization. Now, this organization, this nonprofit, received $11 million from the manufacturer of this drug. After they received the $11 million, they put 6 out of 9, 2/3 of the, they put members on a 9-member panel, 6 of these, and this 66% recommended the use of the drug, which is used when people are having strokes. You know, it's a very dangerous. The risk is high and the benefit is high. Okay, this it's not to be done lightly. I know it's hard to follow, and because it's hard to follow is why they can get away with it. Because it's a cult. Okay, now you take this data, which over and over again is corrupted, and your doctor will do the best he can, at the same time not offending his employer, because his employer will fire him or, you know, not put any heat in his office, whatever. You know, it's not good. And he orders a test. The test has to have what we call a prior authorization, and the insurance company in order to avoid paying for the test or treatments, will make you beg for this test. And it can take a day of phone calls back and forth, or it can take a month. Okay, it's another way that they limit what you can do, what I can do as a physician. I think we have one more slide. Is there another one there? Okay, this, I like this too. This is the administrative cost. Remember, we spend 17.6% of our GDP on, quote, healthcare, unquote. It's 2.5 times as much as the OECD. So 30% of that 17.6% is around 5%. And so we spend as much on the guys behind the desk as the rest of the world spends on all their health care, as a percentage of GDP. So anyway, there are 11 times as many administrators today as there were in 1980. And I'm afraid I'm going, am I being a bit windy? Okay, I am. Anyway, the administrators, not only do they take your shrinking healthcare dollar, they also are, they're not trained, okay? They're deciding what medicines I can use, what operating room equipment I can use, what bandages. And so at that point, you're also suffering in your healthcare, the quality, the value of your healthcare because of that. All right, so now if I was a software company, if I was running a software company, it would fail. I mean, why do we think healthcare should do any better? These people aren't trained, and they are deciding how you're treated. And I'll try to hurry, but how did this happen? How could these people treat other human beings, such as you and your kids, like this? And I propose that to them, you are not considered a human being. You are viewed as a commodity or an object, like coal or wheat or sheep, to be bought, sold, and eventually landfilled. Your humanity has been monetized. In 1949, Dr. Leo Alexander, and in the aftermath of the genocide trials at Nuremberg, in attempting how to understand we as a species could undertake something as incomprehensible as these mass exterminations of what were known as useless eaters, described a core philosophic principle which led to the atrocities. He called this rational utility. Rational utility of human beings, obviously objects. Human beings were sorted and cataloged depending on their utility, like colored pebbles or cattle, and then very rationally culled out like lame cattle or moldy apples. And this was a long process which required a dehumanizing or commodification of the human being. To quote Dr. Alexander, "Whatever proportions these crimes eventually assumed, it became evident to all who investigated them that they had started from very small beginnings. These beginnings at first were merely a subtle shift in emphasis of the basic attitude of physicians. It started with the acceptance of the attitude basic in the euthanasia movement, that there is such a thing as a life not worthy to be lived." End of quote. But I have to ask, is the attitude that a life is only worthwhile if I can profit from it the same or worse than the attitude of a life not worthy to be lived? So that's really all I have.